With the third Democratic debate taking place next week, there is a lot to discuss regarding the state of this race and where it could go. And joining me to discuss this, it's a pleasure to welcome the host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, Ben. How's it going?
It's going well, David. Thanks so much for having me.
So I think the last time I had you on, it was on my radio show, so this was a while ago, and it was before the primary or anything was really happening. And now we are really in the middle of it. So I guess kind of an overall take on the race so far. Is it kind of is it unfolding the way you expected in terms of, you know, the way the polls are looking, in terms of who's performing well, or have you been kind of caught off guard by anything?
You know, the only thing that has slightly caught me off guard is the fact that Biden is still in the race.
Yeah.
I really, you know, not to just be insulting to him, but, you know, I think he's a moron, and he's a gaffe machine. And I figured at this point by now he would no longer be in the lead. But, you know, the establishment machine is pretty powerful. So it's surprising, but it's not totally shocking. Other than that, it's starting to pan out. You know, the first round of people have dropped out. That's to be expected. And, you know, Bernie is still really strong. He's increasing. Elizabeth Warren is a close second to Bernie. I think the outlier is Joe Biden. And it's really a question of how strong the establishment is, whether or not he stays in much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's start with Joe Biden then. He's been having a lot of gaffes. Now, I think we all kind of expected this since, I mean, Biden's history has been gaffe-filled, but it's been getting crazy. I mean, there's just in the past week, this is just two examples, but there are countless examples. He called Obama rap rock Obama instead of saying Barack Obama.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I missed that one.
Oh, you missed that one? Oh, yeah. Maybe I'll drop a clip of that in here. But
that's exactly what Rap Rock and I talked about in the beginning. Rap Rock and I talked about.
That was crazy. And then there was also another moment where he forgot Obama's name.
He's saying that it was President, my boss, it was his fault.
Which for Biden, that's surprising considering, I mean, he's going to attach himself to Barack Obama. But yeah, what are your thoughts on I don't know, Biden's mind, I guess, because I am surprised at just how terrible he is. I guess I forgot, but he's definitely gotten worse, I think.
Yeah, listen, like old age is, and this is not to be ageist, right? You know, it starts, for some people, it starts even much younger. The brain is a very particular organ, man. And when it starts to get weak, I don't know, you know, and I think that's what he's experiencing, early onset dementia, or I don't know what he's going through, but he definitely, I don't believe he has the intellectual capacity. Well, he has intellectual capacity. I think that his brain is just not what it used to be. And even when he was at his best, he was a gaffe machine. So this is something that we have to really take in consideration, right? He's not sharp. He's not on it. He forgets things. And this is not to be ageist. It's just a reality of life. You don't put your old grandpa who you love, right? He's a cool guy if you like him. You know, he's a cool guy. He's fun to hang out with, but you don't put him in an environment where he's going to be brutalized like that. And I think we're setting ourselves up as a nation for failure to put him against Donald Trump. Because if nothing else, Donald Trump's bigotry has kept his mind really sharp. He's really sharp with his insults. He's really sharp with his bigotry. And I don't think Joe Biden is up to the task.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that brings up the question, the electability question. For some reason, despite everything Joe Biden is saying, and despite the fact that when you look at polling on you know, specific issues, say like Medicare for all, that Joe Biden is out of touch both in its platform and in terms of just his performance. So, like, how much longer do you think they can keep pushing out this electability idea? And I guess, I mean, it's supported by the polling right now, but do you think that as more people begin to pay attention, hopefully leading into the fall, that his electability is going to take a hit?
So here's the thing, right? There was a recent poll that showed that all of the top contenders, the top 5 Democrats, all of them, actually all the Democrats beat Donald Trump in a heads-up competition for the general election. Now, it's too early to actually depend on those polls, but that kind of watered down the argument that Joe Biden is uniquely electable above everyone else, because we see the data shows that it's any Democrat can really win. Now, we have to take in consideration motivation of the base, because this is why I don't believe these polls so early on. Joe Biden will not motivate anybody. He doesn't motivate his own wife. So while he may look as though he can beat Donald Trump, it really boils down to who is going to energize the base. And he does not do that like Bernie Sanders. Hell, he doesn't do it as good as Elizabeth Warren does.
Yeah, and I guess I underestimated the mass media's ability to really push the same kind of candidate out there a second time, even after Hillary lost. I mean, you had a candidate in Hillary Clinton who did not excite the base, much like Joe Biden. And I think in many ways, Hillary is clearly a better candidate than Joe Biden is right now.
Yeah.
And even with that, they're still like, they're able to regurgitate this idea that you need somebody who's a moderate. You need somebody like a Joe Biden who can speak to both sides, even though he can barely speak himself, and somehow be able to bridge that gap, when clearly I think we saw that idea fail the last time around.
Yeah, I think it is the conventional wisdom that we get from consultants, the consultant class. And I think, if nothing else, 2016 should have been a referendum on the consulting class of the Democratic Party. Their conventional wisdom failed and has been failing. If you look at the state level races, I mean, they have been abysmal. And so we can't take the conventional wisdom of the consulting class because it fails. And I think that's what you're seeing with them still pushing someone like Joe Biden.
Yeah. So let's move on to Elizabeth Warren now. So when Elizabeth Warren first joined the race, I think she was actually maybe the first big candidate to really join the race. Her support didn't really grow until about April, May, it seemed like. And now she's really, I mean, it's her and Bernie Sanders kind of in second place, but behind Joe Biden. What do you attribute to her rise? And do you think she's able to maintain this solid this rise in the polls and maybe even, take first place?
So she was the very first person to enter the race. And when she first came out, I was like, she's not going to be the one. And I honestly, since then, I've been eating my words, and I happily do so, because she's rolled out consistently plan after plan to the point where it's become kind of her thing, right? It's become the catchphrase. She's got a plan for that. And people really, really like that, and it resonates. But there's something else that's going on that I mean, I don't really want to talk about it, but it's true. Elizabeth Warren is being introduced as a alternative to Bernie Sanders. In a way she is, in a lot of ways she's not. But she's a comfortable place for people who definitely don't want Joe Biden, and for God's sakes, they don't want Bernie Sanders. So they just comfortably rest in the arms of Elizabeth Warren. And she's that alternative to the establishment. She's that alternative to just a whole lot of people who would rather not deal with Bernie Sanders for whatever reason. Yeah,
it's weird. I mean, you look at the polling breakdown. I saw this on Politico. The second choice for people that support Elizabeth Warren, I believe, is Kamala Harris, which, I mean, if you look at their platforms, it's kind of surprising. You'd think it'd be Bernie Sanders as their second choice. But yeah, it seems to be people who, I mean, they may, when it comes down to it, they may be willing to support someone like, Bernie Sanders. But her support right now is really what you say. It's people that don't want a Joe Biden and don't want Bernie Sanders, and see Elizabeth Warren kind of as the gap, or as bridging the gap in that scenario. But I will say, I mean, I like Elizabeth Warren's domestic plans. She doesn't really appear to have much of a foreign policy yet, at least in terms of what she's been discussing. And I think that's really where Bernie Sanders stands out. That and and in addition to that, Bernie's ability to really grow a movement. So while Elizabeth Warren, I think we see in the data that Elizabeth Warren has the second most individual donors, Bernie Sanders has the most individual donors by far, almost doubling Elizabeth Warren's individual donors. So what do you think I mean, what do you say to that? Do you think Elizabeth Warren has the ability to grow that kind of support that Bernie currently has, or what?
So here's the thing. Here's why I kind of believe in Elizabeth Warren a little bit in terms of her ability to generate a movement. There are quite a few of us who are Bernie supporters who originally supported Elizabeth Warren and wanted her to run in 2016.
Yeah.
And those of us, we may have gotten jaded. We may have gotten upset. And I'm saying we because this is me personally. I wanted Elizabeth Warren to run in 2016, and I was mad when she didn't. And then I was furious with her when she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders. But it's 2020. It's a whole different landscape. The stakes are different. You kind of look at her you forgive those things. She should have run in 2016. She didn't. I'll get over it. She should have endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. She didn't. I'll get over it. And there are a lot of Bernie supporters that if for whatever reason, if it's a fair and square fight, they were with Elizabeth Warren first. And so I think she will get quite a few Bernie supporters who will support her. And then she'll obviously get the Kamala Harris supporters. I think she can be a unifying force if these primaries are carried out properly. And I think they will be carried out properly personally. I think she can do it. I don't think Bernie has an infrastructure that he built in 2016. It's going to be much easier for him to do it, for him to capitalize on it, and for him to just go to the general election and win versus what she's having to build. He already built it.
Yeah. And I think also, that's why I see Warren as, this is obviously speaking, way ahead of time, but when it comes down to it, I think Warren would be a fantastic vice president because she is that unifying voice in that way where, for voters that may not, whatever reason, be turned off by Bernie Sanders, largely because of, I think, media bias. But for those voters, Warren would have the ability to maybe bring those people back into the conversation and kind of soften them up to the idea of this political revolution. And going off that, Bernie Sanders now. So his place in the race, I'll be honest, I kind of expected him to be in first in most polls at this point. And Joe Biden has just held on for way too long, even though he continues to drop in support. What do you think about Bernie's performance so far in this primary?
Bernie's been cool. Bernie has been Bernie. The thing about Bernie is he's been consistent forever. Yeah. And so he hasn't really shifted. He hasn't changed in any negative ways. He has made some pivots in a positive direction, particularly on race issues. The interesting thing about it, if you see his tweets on race and particularly the tweet that he put out about black women equal pay, his support base really doesn't support that. You can compare the numbers. Like his average tweet will get somewhere around 20,000 likes. This one got about 3,000 or 4,000 likes, and the comment section was terrible. But that's not Bernie's fault, right?
Yeah.
That's we can't hold him. I won't hold him accountable for really crappy followers. But I really appreciate the fact that he's willing to take it on the chin with his followers in order to do the right thing. And so that has been a really positive move in the right direction since the 2016 campaign. I think he was misunderstood in 2016. I think people intentionally sandbagged him on some race issues in 2016. But I also think he had a difficulty communicating about race in a way that he's improving on now. So I think, honestly, when this race started early with Elizabeth Warren, I tweeted that Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee. I really still believe that. I just hope that we as his supporters don't muddy the water so bad that we divide the party and then everyone else who didn't support Bernie won't support Bernie because they're mad because of all the scorched earth, social media fights, all the pettiness that we see online. I think if we can avoid that, we can actually unify the party behind Bernie Sanders and hopefully like Elizabeth Warren as the VP. And worst case scenario, hopefully the worst case scenario is Warren is the nominee and Bernie is the VP. Yeah. I think those are the bridges that we need to unify the opposition to Trump. Whether you consider yourself a Democrat or not, we obviously should all be opposing Trump at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on the media bias? So I saw you talk a bit about this on your show. Bernie recently discussed how basically there is a corporate framework in mass media that is inherently adversarial to his platform, and that there isn't necessarily a direct media bias against him, even though I'd say I disagree with him on that. I think there actually is a focused media bias against him. But what are your thoughts on that media bias and how Bernie's been treated in the mainstream press so far?
I mean, it's obvious, right? And to me, it's obvious. And I'll be doing some interviews coming up with some folks from some mainstream media outlets, and I plan on asking them all directly. What do they feel about this bias? Do they think it exists? I believe it exists from the standpoint of a couple of positions, right? These are large media for-profit organizations that are invested in by billionaires like Jeff Bezos. He has a vested interest in not having Bernie Sanders as president. I think you can't disconnect that. That's number one. Number two, there's an infrastructure. There's the consulting class. There's the pundit class. There's the commentator class, who all benefit from the positions that they have and they hold as an extension of the existing establishment. And so if you have someone who's coming in to threaten the establishment, that threatens their jobs indirectly. Because once Bernie Sanders becomes president, then you're going to need a whole new breed of commentator. You're going to need a whole new breed of understanding Bernie Sanders. And these people who have invested so much time hating Bernie Sanders, they probably won't be on TV anymore. So, whether they admit it or not, there's an inherent bias there. They're trying to protect their jobs. I mean, and then last but not least, it's just the grip that the advertising industry has on all media. Whether it comes from Jeff Bezos directly, I don't think it does. I think it comes from individual writers who are engaging in self-preservation. But then obviously the last part are the advertisers who they don't, Northam Gundry, I forgot the military companies that invest in MSNBC. They do not want a president who's going to be anti-imperialist. Let's just so there's three different ways that that their biases can enter into the equation, whether they mean it directly and whether Jeff Bezos is saying go after Bernie Sanders or not. There's just so many layers of biases that can enter into the conversation.
Absolutely. Now, let's go into some of the, I guess this is kind of a two-parter question, but there's a debate next week. Finally, one debate, one stage, 10 candidates on the debate stage. So let me just read through all these candidates quickly. We have Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Andrew Yang, Beto O'Rourke, Julian Castro, and that's it. So what do you, I guess, on one hand, what do you expect to see out of this debate, and do you think there is potential for any other candidates to still break through at this point, apart from the top three of Biden, Bernie, and Warren?
No, not really. I think it's going to be out of the top three. Honestly, it's going to come. It has to come down to Bernie versus Warren, because here's the thing: like, the establishment can be powerful. The establishment can inflate polls. They can, especially with landline still being the primary source for polling. Joe Biden is inflated right now. Yeah. When it comes time to vote, the movement is going to move behind Bernie Sanders, and the Elizabeth Warren supporters who are rock solid, they're going to go and vote for Elizabeth Warren. I don't think that Venn diagram overlaps a whole lot right now. People are worried about whether or not they'll be pulling from one another. I think there is some overlap, but I don't think that overlap is enough to give Joe Biden the edge. I do not believe Joe Biden's support is as rigorous as people believe, especially when it comes time to hit the polls in a primary environment. Some of those people who will support Joe Biden, hell, they will gladly support him in the general election, but will they get up and go to the primaries? Not like Bernie supporters are going to do it, and not like Warren supporters are going to do it. So I think it's going to come down to those three. Everyone else, I don't think they have a chance to really break in. I think they have a chance to make a name for themselves, continue to make a name for themselves, but that's about it.
So when it comes to the debate next week, what do you think the strategy should be for Warren and Sanders? Do you think they should directly go after Joe Biden or go after each other? Or what are your thoughts on that?
They should crush Joe Biden, period. They should not attack each other one time.
I agree with you.
Not at all. There's no reason for them to go after each other. There's a natural synergy. Listen, Elizabeth Warren is as establishment as I can tolerate and as I can palate, right? And I think there's a lot of progressives who feel the same way. She's establishment, but we can palate how much of an establishment person she is. If she starts going after Sanders, then she's going to push all of us all of us 100% in Bernie Sanders camp.
Yeah.
Same thing. Like, there are plenty of Elizabeth Warren supporters who, at the end of the day, because they want to get rid of Trump, they will support Bernie Sanders if he's the nominee. But if he goes after Elizabeth Warren, it's going to leave a bad taste in their mouth, and it will divide the party. Joe Biden is the agreed upon muse on which we can just smash, like just destroy him, unleash all of our anger against the establishment, unleash all of our anger against his excuses against Medicare for all. Go after Joe Biden, destroy him, and leave everything else up to Warren and Sanders to take care of in the general election.
I completely agree with you. All right, Ben, where can people find you?
Hey, they can find me on Twitter. They can find the Benjamin Dixon Show on YouTube. Actually, go and subscribe to the Benjamin Dixon Show on YouTube. Dave, you're doing a great thing on YouTube, man. I love your work, man.
Oh, thank you. I love your stuff too. I'll have links below to his show as well, so you can go subscribe there and check it out. All right, Ben, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Take care, brother.